Steph, that was so good. I don't know where she's gone now, but Steph, my job's done. I should just pack up and leave. There she is. If this is your first time joining us during this series as a church, we are unpacking a few of our church values. And I'm just curious, I just want to see a show of hands of how many people could list off what our church values are. To be honest, I don't know why my hand's up because I actually couldn't list them. But it's funny because you can find these values listed on our church website, if you didn't know. And there's also a massive wall in our foyer that has them spread right across the wall. So if you use this back entrance from the car park, you walk past it every single week. There is a big, giant wall with all of our church values, what we value as a church, written right across it. It's funny that we can attend a church for years, be actively involved, and yet not have a clue about what we value as a church. And I'm preaching to myself here because I'm really only now beginning to ask the important questions. Like, why do we exist as a church? What is our vision, and what do we truly value? This week marks part 2 of our Living Lavish series. This church value that we're unpacking here is lavish generosity. Last week in the LDC, Jesse kicked it off by talking us through living lavish. How can I help you? How can I use my gifts and my talents to further God's ministry? How can I use them to build God's kingdom, build the church? This week's sermon is titled Living Lavish. Where does my money go? And I'm just going to put a disclaimer out now. This is by no means a message to guilt anyone into giving money to the church. This isn't a pyramid scheme or a plea for funding to put new tires on my car, or to help Pastor Ray live out his preachers and sneakers dream. This is a message to answer the question, why do we even give? And where does my money go? It's a message to explain the biblical principle of tithing and to celebrate the power of generosity. Growing up as a kid, I would sit in the church pews with my parents, and when it came time in the service for the deacons to come and collect the offering, I would see the offering bags come down the aisle, and I would turn to my dad, and he would empty his pockets of all the change and empty his wallet of all the change, and he would spread it. He wouldn't count it. He would just spread it amongst my siblings and I, and that would be our offering for the week. And of course, that would lead to a bunch of arguments between the three of us of who had more money, only to have my mum stare us down because it was all going into the bag anyway. It didn't matter who had the most amount of change in their hand. When I was in high school, my first job I ever had, if you can call it a job, there was a lady at my church, at my local church that I grew up in, who offered to pay me $25 an hour to clean her house. Now, she was very generous. She was also very patient with me because I am a very thorough cleaner, but I'm also the world's slowest cleaner. And I vividly remember taking that first envelope with the cash that I had just earned in it, and I took it home, and I'd only cleaned for 2 hours that day, but I was way too proud about this first envelope with cash in it. And I was waving it around in front of my parents, look what I just earned. Because I knew in that moment, this is the first time that I didn't have to ask or beg my parents for money, or to ask them if I could have tuck shop money, or if I could go out and spend stuff with my friends. It was the first time that I had my own money. I was brought back down to earth real fast when my mum sat me down and told me about tithe. I remember thinking, this is weird, and I'm sad to give up part of the money that I worked real hard for, all 2 hours of it, but still stoked because I still had $45 to spend from the $50, and $45 would actually spread far back then. I can't believe I'm saying back then, but it really did. I remember I would my I remember thinking that if I had above $40 in my pocket, like I was set. I was rich. That's what I thought. Of course, that was before I had my license and learned about the rise in fuel cost. $45 does not go very far. But I never understood why I needed to tithe. What was God got to do with my $5? This man can turn water into wine and raise people from the dead, but what would he need my cleaning cash for? In college, I worked 3 jobs on campus. And because I worked for Avondale, they gave me the option to have my tithe taken out of my paycheck straight away. It was taken out automatically and straight into the local church. So it was gone before I even saw my paycheck. And even now, my tithe automatically goes out with each paycheck. Out of sight, out of mind. I don't even miss that 10% because I never saw it to begin with. And it's funny when you think about it because we can set up an automatic payment on our e-giving app to send out your tithe every week straight away. You can send out your giving straight away, your offering, and you don't even have to think about it. And I'm not bagging out like the e-giving app or auto payments because I use them. And I know that I'm bad at management, so I kind of need tools like this. So if it doesn't do it for me, I'll probably forget. So these tools can be really helpful, but it's important that in our giving, whether it's auto or manually giving each week, that we're reminded of why we do it. Because when it's out of sight, it's out of mind. We're not thinking about, why am I giving? Why am I giving my offering this week? We can fall victim to the routine and miss out on the miracle that's taking place. I've heard it say like this, if you want to flick to my next slide. Tithing is birthed out of a heart of gratitude for yesterday, but it flourishes into an act of faith for tomorrow. I'm going to unpack this from our text this morning, and we're going to be sitting in the book of Genesis in chapter 14. And this is one of the earliest pictures that we have in the Bible of this practice called tithing. In fact, this concept is found all throughout the Bible. It's a timeless principle that goes beyond Moses and Abraham and right through to the New Testament of God wanting to bring forth blessing in your life, but he's looking for you to learn to then how to trust him. It's about reminding ourselves who we're thankful for and who our source of life is. And before we read this chapter, it's important that we understand the context of this text, which means we'll have to go back 2 chapters to chapter 12. And in chapter 12, we have Abram. This is Abraham before he was given his new name. Abram, he was 75 years of age, and God made a promise to him. This is in chapter 12. God encounters him and says, I will make you into a great nation. And if you don't know, Abraham is considered the father of our faith. Because it's from his line that the entire Jewish line, the entire Jewish race, God's chosen people in the Bible, comes from. And then Jesus enters the picture in the New Testament. And as we're told in Romans chapter 9, we Gentiles, so anyone who isn't Jewish, are crafted into the family of God because of what Jesus did on that cross. So at 75 years old, God says to Abram, I have this huge plan for you, but it's going to require faith. How do we know? There's 2 things. 1, Abram doesn't have a son, let alone many sons. At 75 years of age, God is making this promise to him and his wife, who is also older, and he was making this promise to them, saying, I'm going to make you the father of many generations. And he doesn't even have a son. He can't even say, okay, well, at least I had that one son. Yeah, like this promise makes sense. But it made no sense. It was illogical. And number 2, Abram was asked to leave his home and to set out to a land that God would show him. So Abraham packs up camp, takes his wife Sarai, all his livestock, his wealth, his household, and his nephew Lot. When we reach chapter 13, and we learn that Lot had his own livestock and wealth. So disputes started to break out between Lot's worksmen and Abram's worksmen, and it was creating an unhealthy environment. And eventually, Abraham had to humbly come to Lot and say, for the sake of our own relationship, we need to go separate ways. You can take any land you want, you decide. And if you choose to go right, I'll go left. And if you choose to go left, I'll go right. In chapter 13, it tells us that when Lot looked over the land and he sees this land called Sodom and Gomorrah, and if you know your Bible, you know how that ends up. We learn that in verse 10, it looked pleasing to him because it reminded him of the land of Egypt, which you can read about in the end of chapter 12. But Egypt, it's funny how central this city, this nation was in the Israelite story, because it reminded him of the land of Egypt. He looked at it and it was pleasing to his eye. This place that was a completely different culture, but you know what was different about Egypt was that there was no God. That was the difference. And God was saying, Abram, I am calling you to pick up your camp and set out to a land that I'm going to show you. And so when Abram gives Lot the choice, he looks out and he says, that land there, that land that reminds me of that godless city, that's where I want to be. So he sets up camp right next to Sodom and Gomorrah. This brings us to the beginning of chapter 14, where we're going to be reading today. And so war has broken out in the region. There's this king called King Kedorlaomer. This is the best I'm going to be able to pronounce, and there are a lot of kings' names and nations that I cannot pronounce, so we're just going to tell the story instead of reading it this morning. But this is the first few verses of chapter 14, if you want to read along. But there's this King Kedorlaomer, and a group about 3 other kings with names that I can't pronounce fought against another group about 5 kings that I also cannot pronounce their names. One of them is the king of Sodom. 4 kings against 5. Eventually, King Kedorlaomer and his allies defeat the second group of kings and invade their cities, sending the armies of Sodom and Gomorrah fleeing. They plunder the city, taking the spoils of war and the food supplies, as well as capturing Lot and his family and everything that he owned. One of Lot's men escapes and runs and tells Abram of everything that has happened. And this is the cool part. This is the side of Abraham that we actually don't talk enough about. In verse 14, it reads, "When Abram heard that his nephew Lot had been captured, he mobilized 318 trained men who had been born into his household. Then he pursued Kedorlaomer's army," let's just call him Ked, Ked's army, until he caught up with them at Dan. There he divided his men and attacked during the night. Ked's army fled, but Abram chased them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. Abram recovered all the goods that had been taken, and he brought back his nephew Lot with his possessions and all the women and other captives. Abraham, a 75-year-old man, hears that his nephew has been taken captive, and this 75-year-old man gathers his troops, 318, which I'm pretty sure would have been way outnumbered compared to some of those armies that they would have had to face to free Lot. And he comes with his 318 men, and he chases after them, and he goes into battle to recover Lot and all of his possessions and all of his household. 75-year-old Abram sweeps in to save the day. Verse 17, after Abram continued from his victory over Ked and all his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem and a priest of God Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing: "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you." Then Abram gave Melchizedek 1/10 of all the goods he had recovered. The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give back my people who were captured, but you may keep for yourself all the goods that you've recovered." And Abram replied to the king of Sodom, "I solemnly swear to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take so much as a single thread or sandal thong from what belongs to you. Otherwise, you might say, I am the one who made Abram rich." This is a really important interaction here. The king of Sodom tries to offer Abram payment for his kingdom back. But Abram responds with, "I won't take a single thing from you because I don't want you to have the power to tell the world that you made me rich." Because by this time, the Bible has already told us that Abram is a wealthy man. But in this moment, he's acknowledging the source of his providence. He wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the only source of victory and wealth is the Lord. And there's a second king in this story, a king by the name of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, which would eventually, as the Bible tells us, become the nation of Jerusalem, and priest of the God Most High. So he was king of Salem and priest of the God Most High. Now, if you feel like reading up on something interesting and cool, do a bit of research on Melchizedek. His name is mentioned in the Bible 3 times. The first being here in Genesis 14. He shows up again in Psalms chapter 1, verse 10, and we hear the most about him in the New Testament in Hebrews chapter 7. There's an entire chapter dedicated to this guy named Melchizedek, and I'm not going to deep dive into it this morning because, to be honest, I just feel like I have more to learn, and I don't quite feel equipped enough to go there, but there's a lot of really interesting research out there on him. But Melchizedek, in verse 18, it says, "And Melchizedek, the king of Salem and a priest of God Most High, brought to Abram some bread and wine." Melchizedek brings out some bread and wine. This is probably one of the first glimpses of the Lord's Supper. This is pre-Moses in Egypt. This is pre the Passover, and it's brought as an offering to bring aid, to bring healing to Abram as he got back from a victory. And we continue in verse 19 where it says, "Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you." Then Abram gave Melchizedek 1/10 of all the goods he had recovered. What he's saying here is that God is the one who delivered you. God is the one who helped you. God is the one who won the victory. You have been delivered by God. You have been blessed by God. And what was the response of Abraham? To give 1/10 of all the goods that he had recovered. This is a principle that will show up in the scriptures time and time again. And here Abraham receives a blessing from the Lord, and his response is to say, "Gratitude is hitting my heart," and with gratitude there's a response, so his response is to then be generous. For reference, this is 400 years before the Mosaic law was introduced. There's no law. There's no one making him do this. This isn't a legal obligation. It's an act of love, of gratitude. He was able to win that victory. He's recognizing that he, at 75 years of age and only had 318 men, the only reason he was able to win that victory and get back Lot is because of God's providence. And so now he's going to say thank you by saying, "I'm giving you 1/10 of everything that I have." It's called tithe. I feel we don't get taught this enough. What is tithe? What is tithe? It's the first 1/10 of what we earn. It isn't an afterthought. It isn't us counting how much we need to pay in the next fortnight, how much we would like to spend over the next fortnight or over the next couple of weeks, and then offering what's left. It's saying, "I'm going to give you the first 1/10 of my money and trust you will carry me in the 90%. It's giving him the first tenth in gratitude for what he did yesterday, and also in faith for what he will do tomorrow. It's having faith that he can do more with your 90% than we can do with our 100% all on our own. In 2 Corinthians 9, verse 8, it says, "And God will generously provide all you need. Then you will always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others." So where does our money go? I get it. It's an important thing to know. Okay, well, if I'm going to trust this money with the church, if I'm going to pay this money, so where is it going? This is actually really cool because we are part of a global church. With over 20 million members in our church worldwide, across over 150,000 congregations, with over 7,000 businesses and institutions providing products and services to our community. Isn't that crazy to hear those numbers, to see just how far as a church that we have come since the Great Disappointment in 1844? These are astounding numbers. It's astounding to see the way God has moved. And this is the cool thing about it, that your local giving has a global impact. That $5 from my first paycheck had a global impact. Let's say a church of about 500 tithe returning members, let's say a church of about 500 tithe returning members earn about 100 a week. I'm keeping these numbers really small because, unlike Steph, I'm not great at math, so I can't do anything above this. But let's say, so they're each giving $10 tithe a week. They're earning 100, each giving 10. So that'll be 5,000 a week from this one church. Out of the 52 local offerings collected in a year, I use my calculator for this, that's $260,000 a year in tithe. Half of that, and this is where your money goes, so half of that would be $130,000, that would go towards your local church. It's to keep the bills paid and to keep the toilet rolls flowing and to keep the building functioning, but it's also to fund ministries here. That might be Sabbath school, that might be Pathfinders, that might be kids ministries, that might be youth ministries, but it also is community projects. This is funding that as a church, we get to decide, how can we spread the gospel with this? How can we make an impact in our local community of Springwood? This money that we've contributed, that's what we get to decide happens to it. Oh, that was a weird sentence. Whatever we choose as a church, to use that money to help spread the gospel in our local community, it helps us fund our local mission each year. Now, the other half, the other $130,000, this goes to support ministry beyond our local church. And the key word is ministry. To help grow the mission field in Queensland, in our country, in the South Pacific, and the world. So your tithe, no matter how small or big, goes towards massive evangelism. It goes towards spreading the news of Jesus across the nations. You get to contribute to that. We get to be a part of that. So my $5 from my first paycheck did that. $250 went towards my local church, and $250 went towards the global mission. But it's nice to be able to tell someone of my age at the time that, hey, that your money went towards helping people in other countries, or that your money helped go towards ministries run at our local church. And rather than making tithe an awkward topic, I think it's something to rejoice over, that we get to be a part of a worldwide call to ministry. We get to give back to God in gratitude for what he's already done for us and step into faith that he will continue to provide for us tomorrow. I think we're pretty lucky to be a part of something like that. I'm feeling that right now, as I'm going to pray, I'm going to pray over something specific. I'm going to pray over our church and our community. But I want to pray over our wider community, Springwood. Because right now, we are in such a position to make effective change. We're in a position to spread the gospel message to people who may have not encountered this message or may not seen a good picture of church. Maybe they've never actually encountered Jesus before. And our giving gets to contribute to that. But with that comes vision. It comes back to that question, what do we value as a church? It comes back to that question, why do we exist as a church? Why do we exist here? And just like our tithe, I think we can have a grateful heart, a heart full of gratitude for what God has done for us in the past, but step out in faith as a church in our giving, in using our skills and talents, stepping out in faith and just letting God be faithful to us as a community, to our church, and just seeing the way he moves when we give generously. I'm going to pray. God, I just wanted to thank you so much. I want to thank you for this church and this community. I want to thank you that we have been placed here for such a time as this. We are surrounded by houses, businesses. We are surrounded by people, families. We're surrounded by heartbreak and maybe some wholesome family homes. But God, I just want to pray. I want to pray for our church. I want to pray for vision. Because God, with giving, we need to be, there comes a responsibility with that. That as a church, that we're using our finances to further your kingdom. So Lord, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you with a heart full of joy, full of gratitude for how far you've brought our church now. And I just want to ask that you continue to be faithful to us. Lord, I'm so excited, and we're rejoicing as a church this morning to see what you're going to do next. And God, we have willing hearts. We have willing hearts and a willing congregation right now. And we have a community ready to serve. So Lord, I just want to pray for vision. I want to pray for your vision for our church. I want to pray for your direction. I want to pray for your faithfulness. Thank you, Lord, for loving us and for never forsaking for us, for never giving up for us. We love you, Lord. Amen.